I don't think when a founder starts a company, an entrepreneur, whatever it is, that people believe that they're going to survive enough to worry about succession. In fact, succession is the last thing most leaders ever want to think about because it is just so difficult to make it go. But what's sad is it's the thing that's likely to kill the company. You could end up working years and building something that you're really proud of, something that took blood, sweat, and time away from your life. And it could all die because of the one conversation you're avoiding, which is the succession conversation. The succession conversation, if you're a founder of a company, it's about the leadership of the company. If you're just simply a leader in a small to medium-sized business and you have an overreaching authority, it's that conversation of who's going to fill the influence gap behind you. And so I think succession planning in general is important at all different levels for senior leaders. But I want to talk specifically about founders and CEOs of small to medium-sized businesses. It might be a family-run business. It might be simply an entrepreneurial founder. If you're a couple of years old, you need to be thinking, am I building it for the days when I'm not here? And most of the time, you're just excited to still be alive, let alone having to dream about the past. The problem is there's a couple of real risks. The first one I find with founders that I deal with is they don't realize the invisible dependencies. You may have structures that have boards, that have leadership and senior vice presidents and managing directors and executive directors and all kinds of org structure pieces. But unless you're explicit, people will have this invisible pause or this invisible override that they allow to occur, waiting for the voice of the founder. Because there's a unique mix. I always say to founders, because founders are often usually majority owners, is that there's the leadership role and there's the ownership role. And the fact that the ownership will override the leadership is a problem that most founders don't want to admit. They think they've created structures that way. And so there's an invisible dependency where people are spending, deciding, and waiting on the founder to decide. And that's a real problem. And so on top of that as well, if you were to be hit by a bus tomorrow, who would fill that spot? I was talking to, I have a new client that came into my orbit, and I've been talking to some of their owners for a number of years about some of their needs. Never heard from anyone. And I said, they finally said, hey, well, could you come and meet? And I sat down with them, and they're a successful multi-million-dollar business here in our area. And I said, why now? Yeah, you got some leadership challenges. Yep, get some work to do. Great. But why now when these are the exact same things we talked about a year ago? And he said to me, our number one competitor, who was even better and bigger than us, that we've been chasing for better part of a decade. This company's almost 20 years old. They said the owner sold, and within 6 months, we are now picking up their clients and are hiring their staff because the company may not be around in 18 months. And we don't want to become that. I was glad they had got a mirror held up to them, but the fact that it was so baffling is what actually stirred them to make this change, to step in now, is that they suddenly had a glimpse of it's way easier than they realized in order for it to all go bad. And so what was really powerful is they said, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen to us? And so what I want to do is give you a couple of quick things, 3 quick beats of a way we're approaching that for them. The first thing is we need to map out the challenges, specifically operationally and governance-ly. That's the word. So when it comes to operations and governance, we literally kind of create a map of our first step really needs to be about mapping out from an operations perspective, does the organizational structure that you have right now match the company you want to become? A lot of times founders and startups will have more flat structures, especially in the days of AI, the great flattening right now. We're trying to do more with artificial intelligence, which means we have larger spans of control. So more people managing larger numbers of people. So there's less personal attention. That flatness makes it easy to get started because we're all just in it together, but it makes it more difficult to understand who owns the decision-making, because ownership of decision-making that you're going to distribute beyond the founder has got to have both, we say relational authority, but also positional authority. So first thing we did was we're mapping out the org structure. Does the org structure match? The second thing is the governance structure. How does ownership work? And so for one of my clients, they're a cooperative. They actually are employee owned. But I've actually talked to other family owned businesses where a family has founded it and the owners are family members and the founders haven't done the job of saying, okay, wait a minute. Are the kids going to run the business? Are they not? Who owns it? And what does that look like? And how much of the ownership overlaps with the operations? Those are separate conversations. And so you're going to want to map out a governance structure long-term that is different than the operational structure and knowing how those things play together. The second thing is that once you get clarity on the operational structure, a founder needs to really start to see how can they distribute decision-making and accountability to different roles in a new way. You really do need to redefine the terms and expectations of management and leadership and accountability within that. And so one of the things we did was we actually had to reconceive the most senior levels of the company and describe out the responsibilities and make them accountable specifically for certain things, profit, loss, and performance management. That was a really, really big deal. And then after that, you've got to actually then communicate this to the existing leaders and get their buy-in on the new definition of these roles. Then the last one, we needed to conceive of a vision for the founder beyond the company, beyond the role they're in right now. And most of the time, that means being the keeper of vision and culture more so than the keeper of operations. Making sure that the senior leadership of the future that you've identified by mapping out the governance and the operations, reconceiving the positions, and giving people accountability and authority to take action, you then had to do the work to cast a vision for who you wanted to be. What's that look like? How do you become like emeritus or someone on the board? Cast a vision to do development and do onboarding and training, but start to be removed from the day-to-day operations. The ability to actually cast a vision beyond the company. I would tell you that most founders struggle with the succession question because they don't have a vision of who they're going to be beyond the company in the moment they're in. And so I actually would start there and work backwards. Because most of the problem is that companies, I did some digging and some of the research says that nearly 70% of companies don't survive a founder transition. They don't. And what's funny is senior leaders in companies, if there's not well-distributed leadership, most teams don't survive a founder who's too micromanaging because they're doing the job for their team. And so when that leader's gone and a new boss comes in, that team suddenly doesn't know how to do their own job. So even just succession planning, the ability to identify people within your organization, you can take authority and move on. That's going to be key. When it comes to succession planning, this is something that holds us back. There's an invisible dependency. You got to get honest about that, founder. Your team is likely too dependent on you. The next thing I would say is you need to craft a vision for what your role with the company looks like before, like if you stayed, but beyond the moment you're in, or in exiting, and why that'd be beneficial for the company. Then map out operations and governance, and then begin the change management of inviting people into those new roles and holding them accountable. Because you may not have the people you need, but you've got to start now. It's the succession. It's the future. You got to think beyond the moment of an ending. The problem is we hate endings and we're scared of it. So maybe you need to start dreaming beyond the moment you're in. Maybe you're so effective that you don't realize that we're becoming dependent on you. Think about the outcomes that you want to survive your leadership. And what's the structures and relationships you need to clarify and bolster now to make sure that this can have legacy long after the moment of your butt in that seat has passed. What do you find? Do you know any leaders that have stayed too long? What was the consequences? You know, leaders who knew how to do succession well. I've got a guy I know who actually founded a company, got great investment, and then was like, hey, my number 2 is better at the next stage than I am, and handed off the reins. That was genius. It's about vision and not being attached to ego. Man, the more you can do that, the more the succession question and the more the succession planning becomes easier. If you want to talk about this, my inbox is open. Love to hear from you. Like, share, please follow. These are always helpful. We want to reach as many people as possible. We're just trying to make it useful. Start with your vision, map out your operations, map out your governance, new structures, invite your team into it. Hey, hope you're having a great day, and I hope whatever you're building survives your transition.